Hi, my name is Jordi. I know most of you here in the room, but for those who don't know me, I've been working with Mike and Chris for around 6 years. And one question that I get asked often is that why do we decide in these topics and the formats of the event? And I have to share the story of this particular one really fast. Around a month and a half ago, a few staff members of the Lexington team got to spend a day with a monk. And it was definitely not something we do traditionally. I mean, but it was a very different Thursday for us. And one thing that he brought to us was a chart. And yes, the monk gave us a chart. And I am a very graphic design guy. Everything I try to do at the office, everything I try to do in these events has to be graphically appeal. And this was definitely not the most graphically appealed chart I ever seen in my life. It was made by the monk. But it was the most revealing one for me. And I'm going to show it to you guys. It was this one. And the way he described it was, we live days and lives right now where we just don't make decisions based on clarity. And our time constraints are all different for all kinds of decisions. So in his perspective, there was a negative correlation between how when you extend time, clarity becomes really hard for decisions. But when you shorten the time, the clarity of your priorities and decisions becomes really easy to see. And we made a little exercise, and the typical, if you would die in 3 hours, what would you do? Who would you call? And well, that was an interesting exercise for me. And apparently my sister wouldn't get a call. He did after 24 hours. She's not here, so it's okay. But that's the reason why we decided to divide this event in head and heart. Because we thought dividing those two topics, those two different decision-making processes would be important for tonight. We all have different timelines, we all have different decision and priorities, but we wanted to make sure that the hard conversations get done and the head conversations get done so we can bring some clarity to you guys. So please, I'll encourage all of you to ask questions as the panel is up here. This is for you, and so that was my introduction. So I'll introduce the panel for you. I'm very excited about this. The first one is Danielle. Danielle has been a guest for us twice in Empower Women series. She has had amazing ratings after every event. She is a writer. She's a self-care coach. Danielle is the kind of person that if you talk to her for 2 minutes, you feel better. And I wanted all of you to have those 2 minutes. So Danielle, please have a seat. We also have with us Marco. Marco is a strength and conditioning coach, and he specifically told me not to call him a trainer, and I agree with him. They do so much more than that. And Marco is lucky enough to work with people in all kinds of ages, and they care about the long-term health of their patients or clients. And I'm glad you're here. Thank you for joining us, Marco. And we have Kate Grondin. Kate works in an industry that not a lot of people know it exists. And Kate is a home transition specialist. And we all have been in those situations where for X, Y, or Z, we have to change homes. We're thinking of our parents changing homes. We're thinking of inheriting a home. And maybe it's not the home we want. Maybe there's emotions attached to the possessions that somebody left behind in the home. Kate deals with that. And the stories I've heard from Kate are amazing, so she's going to be adding a ton of value to this panel. So, welcome. I'll sit with some space here. I had a pre-call with all of the speakers before today's event, and to tell them what the first question was going to be, so they would prepare. What they don't know is I'm going to change the question. No, I'm just kidding. It's the same question. I just want to see their reaction. They've all been thinking for the question. No, but the first question I wanted to ask them was something that we at Lexington see a lot, which is people don't tend to think of the priorities the same way we see them in their own lives. So the first question is this one. What is the most common thing people should be asking you, but they never do?
Would you like to go first?
Ladies.
Wow, it's truly hard to narrow it down because I feel like it's dependent on age group. It's dependent on sometimes gender, where you are in your life. People don't ever really ask me if I'm going to do one thing for self-care, what should it be? It does vary from person to person. So if I had to generalize, and I was saying for one thing, it's probably the thing that the majority of people balk at the most, which is finding a moment for yourself in the day, hands down, which would really lead to be selfish. I feel generationally speaking, my husband always teases me that I'm 90 because I grew up with people that were way older than me and no other children. One thing that I kind of took from the generations that brought me up is that being selfless meant that you were a good person. But what I find now with the majority of my clients is a lot of imbalance, a lot of lack of permission, a lot of inability to just grant yourself a moment to be yourself by yourself. Of course you can do this with other people, but if I have to be most specific, I would say if you could take 2 minutes a day for some kind of meditation, that's what I would really boil it down to. And that's a scary thing for a lot of people. Probably me 10 years ago too. I thought it was weird and I thought it was something I simply did not have time for. I was a busy person. 2 minutes of being selfish every day, which can sometimes be a nice gateway to 5 minutes and maybe even 10. So that, prioritizing you, putting your oxygen mask on first, just for a second.
How about you, Marco?
I would say that one of the things that I commonly see people who present with injuries or some sort of movement restrictions or inabilities that are causing them to have some sort of negative stressor in their life. Like, for example, I've had this shoulder issue for a really long time, or this ankle always seems to bother me when I try to do this with my kids. And really, we understand that fitness and exercise are just as important for us as some of the things that we prioritize for our brain and our mental health. But the question that people need to be asking is their fitness modality that they're participating in the appropriate one for them? And I think that's something that we need to all sort of sit back and examine what we view as health and fitness and exercise, because what we have, at least in the United States, is not a lack of information, but what we have is filter failure, where the things that are considered to be very, very cool and sexy aren't always necessarily good for the body. So to take that time to find a professional who has a lot of experience and a valued education, the same way you would trust somebody to manage your wealth or make decisions about what you're going to do with your automobile when it breaks down, or things like that, decisions that we wouldn't necessarily make on our own. Oftentimes that's part of our health, our physical well-being needs to be put into the hands of somebody who can make an appropriate decision for us. So it kind of segues off of what Danielle was saying about taking that time and recognizing that your health is a selfish thing, and it can often get pushed aside because of other priorities, but that you need to make sure that you take that time and give that to yourself. Because it's not just for you, but it's also for the people that you're around, that you're going to be with every day.
So I spend my days helping people downsize and execute moves and divide estates, put their homes on the market. You know, some of these things that make people sort of grunt and groan because it's not so much fun. And I wish that what people realize is that the process of downsizing and moving forward is actually a liberating and very positive experience. I polled my managers a few weeks ago about the meaning of downsizing. What is downsizing? And the most popular answer was that it was liberating. And I think it's liberating because as you go through the downsizing process of getting rid of things that you really don't need, you realize that life becomes more about who you are and less about what you have. And that's just a really good feeling for people. So, just knowing that it can be a positive experience is something that I wish more people knew about.
Thank you. First of all, can everybody hear us in the back? I just want to make sure the volume. Okay, good. Don't worry, they heard us. The second question I wanted to ask them was completely the opposite, which is, what do you actually hear every day that you have to repeat constantly? And it's kind of like, and people tend to not get it on their own. They come to you guys for help.
People always ask me if I'm taking one vitamin or just a couple, what should I take? So what I always tell people is make sure you're taking vitamin D3 with K. If you are only taking one, generally speaking, 5,000 milligrams of vitamin D3 with K for absorption is what you want. During the winter months, double it. Yes. I've never heard of K. So you can get it from kale, you can get it from some leafy greens, but you would have to have a lot of it. Think about that old Total cereal commercial where it was like 1 million bowls, kind of like that for bushels of kale. So it helps with absorption. It basically, D3 is fat soluble. I'm getting all scientific, but K kind of counters any lack of absorption that your body would push it towards. So if you're buying, sometimes you hear vitamin D, and particularly where we live in the United States, we need vitamin D because we're not outside a lot, and people are also scared of the sun now, and that's with reason. But vitamin D with D3 is the kind you need, and K is the other one. And the other, that if you're taking more than one, it's probably fish oil. And if you're prone to getting sick, 1,000 milligrams of vitamin C a day, up to 3,000 milligrams, which could make you a little bit bloated, but go away over time if you get a good brand. So not the most interesting answer, but that's the one I find myself repeating most often. So.
How about you, Mark? The thing that people ask me often is what is the best training program, or what is the best rehabilitation program? And I kind of have two answers. One is a little bit broad, and then the second one will actually give you guys some valuable information to take away. And I always say the best sort of training program or rehab program is the 5x3 or 5x52 program, which means you do some sort of exercise 5 days a week, 52 times per year. Because ultimately, if it's walking or some strength training or yoga or Pilates or spin or bicycle, whatever it is that you enjoy, that's going to obviously, some consistency over time is going to be the most valuable thing for the longevity of your orthopedic health. Secondly, to get a little bit sciencey, to have an understanding for the fact that if I take a picture of Jordi right now, and then 7 years later I take another picture of Jordi, over the course of those 7 years, every single cell in his body is going to have turned over. And ultimately what that means is as the cells turn over, the body becomes very, very efficient at getting rid of things that we don't necessarily need. So for example, we all know somebody who has trouble reaching their arm overhead, and they tend to shrug, and maybe their head comes forward a little bit when they go to get a coffee cup out of the cabinet. Well, part of that is possibly because perhaps they haven't been exploring the range of motion that their shoulder has to offer them every day. So over time, as the cells turn over, the body will say, hey, we never go here, so let's get rid of that. We're going to be as efficient as possible. So we're going to take that movement quality and we're just going to erase it from our nervous system. So as a home practice, I always try to encourage people every day to just take your mobile joints, the neck, move it around in all of its ranges, the shoulder, move it around, touch your toes or forward fold, move your spine a little bit, move your hip, move your ankle, fingers, toes, all the things in our body that are designed to move and support us over 80 to 100 years need to be tested and stressed a little bit every day so that we keep them functioning fully and properly.
Okay.
And for me, there's a couple. One is, when should I start downsizing? I hear that all the time. When should I start? And my answer is always today. We all have areas in our home that we can downsize, whether it be a junk drawer or a closet or a collection. And so starting today, it just makes it easier down the road. The other question I get all the time is, what is my stuff worth? I want to sell it. How much can I get for it? And that's a tough one because it depends on how much time you have to sell it. So if you have a long time to get the price that you want, then you may get the price you want. But if you're trying to sell something and control the price and you only have 3 weeks to do it, you probably won't. So it's, people are curious about what to do with their things and what they can get for the items that they have. But lots of times people are disappointed because the market for secondhand furniture or secondhand anything tends to be a little soft. So the earlier you can get started in the process of addressing some of your things, the happier you will be. So starting early is ending happy.
There's a reason why 1-800-GOT-JOHN is doing so well.
Yeah, it's last minute decisions, right? Yeah, so we're thinking of opening it right now. I have a lot of questions on my own, but we have limited time, so we wanted to get as many questions from you guys.
I'm wondering about exercise and the cells and what you had mentioned. Can we rebuild them?
Yeah.
Your shoulder, and did it get rid of them and they're gone and we're screwed, or?
No. So the same way the brain and the body have the ability to remove patterns and specific things, barring any sort of structural change, like for example, like a knee replacement or a hip replacement, where the structure can no longer physically or biomechanically move because there's some sort of metal or whatever it may be made out of or constructed with. We can retrain the brain and the body to do certain things. Now, that's not always as easy as stretching. Oftentimes you need somebody who is experienced in isolated motor control who can teach you, like, hey, how come I can only get my arm this high? Well, we can train you to get it back up to here, but it's as much as it is an issue in the shoulder as it is in the brain, and repetitive stress will allow you to eventually get some of those things back. But it can absolutely be turned around.
So I actually go to his facility as many times as I can per week, and there's a bunch of things I can do today that I couldn't do 4 or 5 years ago. And sometimes I forget and I think I can't do it. I'm like, oh yeah, I can actually do that. Sometimes your brain trains itself to think it can't. So
the brain is plastic.
down there.
Danielle, when you said 5,000 milligrams of D3, is that per day or per week?
I mean, it's hard to make a blanket recommendation because we're all so different.
If you're like completely deficient and you can't get it up with sun or just food.
Yes, it's per day. And if you're really, you should absolutely have your levels tested before you start. It's worth everybody going in. And it also depends on the brand. I have my favorite brands. There's one that's local that's like a pharmaceutical grade. They're called Innate Response. I love them. So they tend to be the most expensive in the supplement world, but I also feel like it's such a kind of crapshoot when it comes to vitamins that you don't know what you're getting. So with them, I've toured the facility. I know it's legitimate. So yes, 5,000 on a general scale, but it really does vary. You might be running higher than you think. So if you take too much, it can be toxic. So it's worth monitoring.
Okay, thank you.
Can any of you talk about time management and focus? Two of my biggest challenges.
We probably all can.
Yeah. Go ahead, take the lead.
Go ahead.
I use something called the Passion Planner, which is just a simple little notebook that allows you to really organize every single hour of your entire year. And what I try to do is just make sure I plan out the non-working activities that I know I need to prioritize by writing them in there and making sure that I leave those times for myself. So I'm sure Mike can attest that he's seen me, training in the facility at the same time as him, but pretty infrequently. I always leave 8 a.m. available for somebody to train during that time. But I make sure that at 2 p.m. every day, I have that blocked off, and I consistently make sure that I lock that time in as my own, kind of like what Danielle was talking about, is having that time where you're selfish, where you prioritize yourself. And I think having something, the same way we say, we should write down our goals, because the research shows that when you write them down, you're going to be more successful. The same way goes for when you're prioritizing your schedule. If you write it down as opposed to waking up saying, maybe I should exercise today. But if you know on Sunday that Monday you're exercising at noon, then you're much more likely to adhere to that schedule. Hope that helps.
What is that notebook called?
It's called a Passion Planner. It's really, really neat. There's aside from, sorry? It's a product that you buy, yeah. They're available on Amazon. And other than just being a calendar, there's all sorts of different areas on the side where it forces you to write about things that you're grateful for, or things that you have planned for this week for work. What sort of things are you planning in your personal life this week? And so it really helps me to kind of check all my boxes and prioritize all the things that I need to, so I can stay balanced.
And also the process of physically writing it versus typing it uses an entirely different part of the brain. So we've all made this transition to electronic calendars, and we see it, but it doesn't always register in the same way. I have one that's sort of similar that I really like called Bullet Journal. Maybe some of you have heard of it. Probably similar in scope, but it's worth Googling, especially if you look at Google Images for Bullet Journal. I would say it's probably more for the right-brained person if you're a doodler, or if you know that you take information in better from writing it down. Have you seen it before, Jordi? No. It lets you, some people go crazy with it. Like I've seen some very interesting millennial iterations where there's like a unicorn represents this. I mean, I don't go crazy. Mine is just different symbols sometimes, but somebody will put a key in the front of it. You can buy a bullet journal. You can also buy a blank journal, or specific ones are recommended. There's a German one called Leichturm, Leichturm, that I love. It's blank, but you fill it in and you kind of take it through. That's one. So it doesn't really sort of, if you struggle with time management, it's a good idea to handwrite, is what I would say. And that sort of produces the commitment right there. For me, as somebody who also struggles with time management, handwriting it is one piece, but putting it into my calendar, my electronic calendar, is a secondary piece. So I have something pop up on my phone or my computer, but I also have something that I can go back to. And it's not as ideal, but I know that I have to kind of work against the trickster that I am, and it does the job.
On that topic, just real quick, Marco, who works with a guy named Mike Boyle, who owns a gym, he actually gave me a journal. And the journal is a gratitude journal. And so I used to spend my last 15 minutes before I went to sleep perusing my texts, my emails, making sure I had everything covered. Then I wake up at 5:30 in the morning, boom, turn it on. Did anything come in? Do I need to do X, Y, and Z? And I was stressing myself out. I mean, you have to do it, but not do it. So now my day ends with making a few comments in a gratitude journal. And it begins with that. Maybe it's 5 minutes each part of the day. Changed my world. In a to-do list world, it's just really nice to think about what's taking place that you're really grateful for. So, you have a question?
When you're teaching for the downsizing, what you tell them what to do with the sentimental thing, not the monetary value that they have.
I'll repeat the question. Is like, when you're downsizing, how do you start managing the sentimental part of it?
Yeah. So, one of the first things that people need to know about downsizing is that it's emotional, and it's not easy to part with things that are cherished, and sometimes you don't have to. And it just depends on where you're going and how you're planning your space. So if you have sentimental items that are going to fit and we do a lot of floor planning, you can take those things. If there's sentimental items that you absolutely have to get rid of, then there is a process that you need to say goodbye, and you need to feel good about where that piece is going. Oftentimes telling a story to someone about the piece makes it easier to let it go. Feeling good about its next life. If you're giving it to a charity that has a lot of meaning to you, or you're passing it down to a grandchild, or wherever it's going, if you can feel good about where it's going, that also helps to let it go.
Just to follow up on that, Mark, Frank, and I were in a meeting today with a new client who had, I think, 5 houses. And they said one of the houses was the big family home where they raised the children and everything, and it makes all the sense in the world to get rid of it. But that's where they have all the memories of raising the kids and everything else, and the kids still come back to that home, and they use it to kind of set their compass. So you look at it and say, geez, this house is worth $2-3 million, and I own all this other real estate. Does it make sense to own it? Financially, of course not, right? But emotionally, yes. And so these are challenging decisions.
Yeah, I think what's surprising too to families is that they think that the parents are going to have a hard time letting go of the family home, but oftentimes the adult children are the ones that have a really hard time. And so that's where we come in to really help with that emotion, but it surprises a lot of people.
So true. Other questions?
So regarding physical and mental wellness, regarding physical or mental wellness, I'm curious how you guys feel about sort of the technology trends and the fact that we are wedded to these devices, and if you have any suggestions about how to best manage them. I mean, they offer a lot of help, but I think they're also a hindrance in looking up and seeing the world and using our bodies as well. So I'm curious.
Thanks, David.
Well, you've probably heard that, some of you probably heard that they will say somewhere in the next 10 years that phone usage was the smoking of this generation. And I definitely perceive that to be true. I mean, apart from the fact that the phone itself emits radiation that is just so bad for us. People keep it in their pocket, and for men it's not good for the prostate. Women tuck it in their bras, and that's terrible as well. And so then you think, and now, Apple has come out with earbuds. Like you saw, so I work with somebody who's a radiologist, and he said he was seeing a lot of people coming in with a tumor shaped just like the device that hangs behind the ear that people hook the little Bluetooth device on. And he was saying that he felt like this was exactly why we should sort of shy away from it. But this was 10 years ago. And now we see like Apple has come out with their version. And so it got me, I called him the other day because I said, so if Apple's coming with it, surely we must have made some advances to kind of block some of the radiation. And he said, no, quite the contrary. And I said, well, it's probably good then at least that we use earbuds. And he said, not unless you use the old-fashioned tube kind that used to be on the airplane, that the wire itself emits the sorry, I'm losing the word, the radiation. And so, it's frustrating because we've got our Apple Watches and we've got our Bluetooth device in the car, and as you said aptly, it makes life a lot easier. But at the same time, we're not necessarily present anymore. So it's you have the awareness, and if you have the initial awareness, that's your body's instinct speaking to you. And as a culture, we don't necessarily pay attention to our gut perhaps as much as other cultures do. But if it's speaking to you, it's an opportunity to say, okay, this is something that I'm going to do during these hours. Or I have a couple of colleagues that send out their signature on their email is, I check email at 11 a.m. and 3 p.m. and I reply by 8 p.m. So that's when you can expect it. And then they set it aside. And people are starting to move towards having moments when they're with their phone and when they're not with their phone. They say that baby boomers are worse than millennials and children with their phone, which is interesting because I see children at dinner tables all the time in public restaurants on iPads and phones, and I'm horrified and appalled, but at the same time, it's a very real thing. So I think it's a conscious decision to know that if you're having that sort of conflict within, that it's an opportunity to say, okay, here's when I'm going to use it and here's when I'm not going to use it, and seeing how that feels. Like on vacation, you know, when you're stuck away. Even then, now it doesn't seem like such a big deal, but it's always accessible.
I have a not-so-extreme version and an extreme version. The not-so-extreme version is to just buy an alarm clock. No devices in the bedroom, particularly at night, because if you do spend 8 to 10 hours a day sleeping the way you should, then that's 8 to 10 hours of Wi-Fi and Bluetooth radiation in your bedroom that can be in another part of the house. That's the non-extreme version. The extreme version is I have clients of mine who have actually installed power switches to their homes in their bedroom so that when they hit it at night, everything but the refrigerator and the heating system and the things that need to be on all the time power down, including the Wi-Fi and all Bluetooth devices and things like that. That way the house is completely void of some of those things for at least 8 hours a day. And those are obviously two major extremes, but again, this scheduled email time instead of just being like, well, I'm standing in line, so like let me just check my email real quick. Picking those time blocks and blocking that off for your texts and your emails and things like that will be probably your best option.
One other note too is that we shouldn't use any devices 30 minutes before bed or be exposed to any blue light. The reason for that is because, maybe some of you who know, the optic nerve, when we produce melatonin versus serotonin, melatonin tells us it's time to sleep, serotonin tells us it's time to learn. And serotonin is turned on by blue light. So in the morning, when light starts seeping through, I mean, true, like functional medicine doctors will tell you your room should be pitch black, not even the light of an alarm clock or a night light or the light of a fridge, and that if your optic nerve picks up any light during your sleep hours, if you wake up to go to the bathroom, or if you're someone who falls asleep with the television, or you're in the dark looking at your phone, perhaps while your spouse has fallen asleep, that it's telling your body you're still producing serotonin and it's totally blocking the melatonin. So that's one thing that impedes sleep. But if you wake up in the middle of the night and you can't sleep, and rather than choosing a book and you choose your phone, you stop melatonin production for the rest of the night. So if you fall asleep at 10 and you wake up at 11 and you walk into the other room to shut off the lights because you fell asleep on the couch, that's it for the melatonin for the night. So those are kind of, for me, science is kind of the thing that gets me to change my habits. So knowing that being exposed to any of the blue light stops the melatonin production, and that I can't start producing melatonin for a good night's sleep unless I give my body anywhere from an hour to 30 minutes of ramp up time. And you think about our ancestors and sunrise and sunset, that was how we operated. So we're not probably, as the humans that we are today, going to replicate those exact circumstances, but something in that vicinity is a bit of, it's motivational to at least know that for me, so.
And just to give you a quick, we have talked about this addiction to technology before for some events we have done at Lexington. And one of the things that has come up is how little we acknowledge that we don't have control over what the devices are doing to us. That we tend to lie to ourselves that we can just control it, we can just put it away. But they're designed for addiction. And the colors they choose are designed for addiction. So we learned a couple of tips of putting your phone in black and white, reduces around 75% of the addiction to like looking at the phone, and that's a quick thing.
You did it for me. You can
switch your iPhone to black and white, and that just takes a little bit off it. Yeah, 3 times. And notifications. You don't need to know every single notification in the world at every single time. Just look at it whenever you want. Just have some control over the technology.
He's saying it's a setting. We know that we can turn off some of the notifications, but I didn't know you could turn off the one on Facebook, for example. So now they're sending me ridiculous notifications, right? And so now I go in and I'll see that I have 85 notifications because I turned it off, and it's thrilling to me. I feel like I beat Facebook.
How's that time?
I was going to check time.
How are we doing with time, Chris?
Okay. A couple more questions.
Going.
Yeah. Yeah. I have one too.
Hold on.
Hi, Kate. So when you're actually working with a family to transition into a smaller home or a relocation, do you actually spend time talking with the family, like the children and the parents, or how does it actually, can you just talk a little bit about how it actually works and what you've seen be most successful?
Yeah, so the person in transition is our client. So, and that's the person who signs our service agreement, and it's usually a parent. And the adult children, we ask permission, basically, to let them know what's going on and involve them. You know, every family's different, and we like it when the entire family is involved to a point where they're supporting the parents emotionally, but then we're doing all of the physical work and the coordinating because they need that emotional support where we can do everything else. And we do a lot of communicating via email and telephone and however we need to make sure everyone's up to date on what's going on. But yeah, that's where it works best, when everyone is involved. And we're buffers too, you know, if there's any, difficulty with relationships, we're there to preserve the relationships. When people are in transition, it brings up a lot of emotion. And so we're there to just make sure that everybody's still friends at the end.
So one quick story. I showed that picture of my family up there earlier. One of my father's last things he said to me was, make sure your mother stays in this house. That's what he thought. So basically, he spent the next 20 years just making sure everything was okay. We couldn't have someone plow the driveway or whatever because she didn't like other people doing things. So every time there was a snowstorm, one of us or one of the grandchildren would be sprinting over to the house to make sure it was, and all this stuff. So finally, my brother convinced my mother to sell the house, and I was really mad at him. I was like, what are you doing? The plan was to keep Mom in the house no matter what, right? Moved into a condo in Reading. Couldn't be happier, right? She's met, like, the house, that's just the house. No, and I'm the person that was devastated. That's not the house, it's the house, right? And she's like, no, this is great. It's all new, isn't it nice? I've met new friends, new neighbors. I'm hanging at the senior center. We have bingo twice a week. She couldn't be happier. When I thought the wish was to, and maybe that was my dad's wish, and that was 21 years ago, and things change, right? So it almost caused me and my brother to get into a long rift, and it turned out we didn't because I was wrong, so I quickly quieted down and slinked away.
One last question before I
ask myself.
Yep.
Maybe it's a whole other session. One transition we didn't talk about was retirement, and it's just so huge. And I don't even know how to ask a question about it, but the whole idea of it's the horse wants to pull the milk wagon all its life, and then suddenly the horse is not pulling the milk wagon anymore. That is a very palpable effect when you retire.
That will be covered in the next session.
Yeah, it will be.
So we've got it.
Yeah.
Great question.
I do want to ask one closing question for you guys, and it's that what is one thing that we can start doing tomorrow that could have a really big impact in our days?
Clean out your junk drawer. Take your junk drawer and start sorting like with like and throw things out. Put things back in a nice orderly way, and every time you open that drawer, you're going to be happy. That will get you to see that when you do that with your entire house, you're going to be that much more happy.
When you floss your teeth, move your joints. It's that important. If you listen to the dentist and you floss every day, understand that moving your joints is equally as important.
2 minutes for you. Set a timer, set an egg timer, close your eyes, go in your closet, go in the bathroom, nothing else. eyes closed if you can, open as fine to start or at half mast, just kind of blur them out. 2 minutes. 2 minutes, that's it. That's it. And then if you like it, add it on, 1 minute at a time.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
So, we will be